My name is Don Jorgensen. Welcome back to our discussion on issues and candidates. Joining me in the studio today is Mr. Chris Pappas, incumbent state executive councilor from the 4th District, which includes the town of Londonderry. Chris, welcome.
Good to be
Thanks
with you,
for
Don.
joining us.
Don, I appreciate it. Thanks for the public service you're doing for the people of Londonderry. It's always great to get back out there and make sure we're communicating with folks and getting people up to speed on what we've been doing in Concord.
Well, thank you, and that is indeed the hope here as well, that people will have a chance to find out what indeed is going on. Chris, if I have my facts correct, you've been an executive councilor now for 2 terms. And for those who have not yet had the pleasure of meeting you, perhaps you could tell us just a bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm a lifelong New Hampshire resident, grew up in Manchester, went to public schools here, came back after college to get involved in my family's restaurant business, and on the side do my part to give back to my community through public service. And so I run a restaurant that's been around for about 100 years. My great-grandfather started it, the Puritan Backroom Restaurant in Manchester. So I'm the 4th generation to be a part of it. It's a very rewarding tradition to be a part of and be able to carry forward. And it's a touchstone for many people in the region. And I'm thankful that I have great family members that help shoulder the burden at the business so that I can be up at the State House and do my job as an executive councilor. I've been elected to 2 terms. Before that, I served in county office. I also served in the state legislature for a couple terms. And I see this as a way to give back to the community, but also make sure that we have folks in Concord that have a balanced perspective that's grounded in the community.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now your family is, your 4th generation since they immigrated here from Greece, if I recall.
That's right.
Wonderful. Have you had an opportunity to go back?
I've gotten back a couple times.
Lovely.
And I've, finally, my parents went over there last year and took a look around too. It's neat to be able to go back and have that history. New Hampshire's a great place to call home. So I'm so glad my relatives landed here because we've got a great natural environment.
Certainly.
We have strong communities. We're a safe state. We're a healthy state. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country, actually tied for the lowest right now. So we have a lot going for us. But we do still have some challenges that I want to get to work on in another term.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, over 4 years ago, you chose to run for executive councilor here. Has your motivation to improve the social and economic conditions of our citizens, and obviously with that, our great state, changed in any measurable way over this 4-year period?
No, I still think there's a lot we can do to impact people's daily lives. And, the position of council is pretty unique. We're essentially a board of directors for state government. We field a lot of constituent calls, a lot of calls from any one of the 19 communities that are represented in this particular executive council district. And so each day, I'm asked to go to bat for people that I represent. And I find it, when you can match people up with where they need to go or get people's questions answered, it's a good day. And so I take that very seriously as part of my job as a counselor. But I think beyond that, as a state, we're uniquely qualified to be able to come together and actually make things happen. You see political paralysis in Washington, which poisons the well and causes it to be a zero-sum political game. I think in Concord, we've been able to bridge that divide in some unique ways. We've seen some advancements on transportation funding, on higher education funding, for instance, on healthcare, some bipartisan solutions that have been pushed and I think are going to, in a fundamental way, move our state forward. So those are some of the things that I would point to as the way we in New Hampshire can roll up our sleeves and get things done. And I think that has a great impact on our economy, on the quality of life in our state, and on the experience that people have in every corner of New Hampshire.
Well, and it's interesting, you brought up the discord in Washington, D.C. But I have noted that at least on the executive council, there's really a concerted effort to try to reduce the conflict in that environment. Sure, there are differences, which of course there should be. And from my own perspective, and these, the people, the citizens are probably not terribly interested in it, but from my own perspective, I notice that a lot of people appreciate when we can come together and find common ground, that it really does move the state ahead very substantially.
Well, I
What-
think the council, if I can just add, we have a unique vantage point because we're not a legislative body.
Sure.
We don't have political caucuses necessarily. Well, we're elected with a D or an R after our name. There aren't votes that are whipped by a political party. So we can bring our experiences to the table, add something to this discussion, and hope that it moves the ball forward for the state. So when we deliberate on contracts, on hiring people for important positions, those aren't Republican or Democrat issues. That's about getting it right for the people of New Hampshire. And so I think, if we can focus on fundamentally where the Executive Council can add value, I think it's not a space that is or should be partisan. It's a space where we bring our own experiences and points of view and help shape, a better, more responsive state government.
So in other words, finding common ground.
Yes.
Let's move on to some of the other issues. You obviously have been an executive counselor for 4 years, and you've gained an intimate knowledge of the responsibilities of the position as well as insights into the needs of the council and certainly for the state. Perhaps you can take a few minutes to give us some insights into the needs for and the obligations of the council itself. You've hit on them, but perhaps they'll give you a more direct reference.
It's a unique construction. There isn't another state that has something of this nature. And the Executive Council operates like a board of directors for the state. The governor has, weak constitutional powers. She has to come to the council to get most things approved that she wants to get done within the executive branch. And so there's a lot of advice and consent that goes on between the governor and the council. We approve all state contracts in excess of $25,000. We approve most of the governor's appointments. You're talking about things like key appointments to the judiciary, our state Supreme Court, all our state courts, the Office of Attorney General, every department head that makes up the governor's cabinet comes through the council, and hundreds of other positions to boards and commissions. We also write the state's 10-year transportation plan, a process that's pretty protracted, starts at the community level, but we're the ones that actually write that first draft and send it off to the governor's office to be legislated. And as I mentioned, we're also an important point of contact for constituents that have an issue with government or an issue within their community and need help. So in that sense, we operate like a board would for a large company. And I think that's why it requires folks that have a business background, are community-oriented, aren't ideologues, but are cognizant of the need to work together, hire the right people, and make sure money is spent appropriately.
So in essence, what I'm also hearing is that essentially you're kind of the eyes and ears for the 200,000+ citizens in the district.
That's right. These are large districts. There are 5 councilors that are elected in districts around the state of New Hampshire. We each represent obviously a fifth of the state. So that means about 260,000 residents in each district. This one has 19 communities, including Londonderry, Auburn, Manchester, Bedford, and several other communities in the greater Manchester area. And they're a diverse set of communities with a diverse set of needs.
Certainly.
You have an urban area such as Manchester. You have a large, more suburban community like Londonderry. You have some rural communities like Lee and Pittsfield that are in the district too. There's some diversity in terms of who I represent. But at the end of the day, I think people are looking for the same thing. When they call their counselor, when they look at state government, they want something to happen. They want responsive leadership. They want that road or bridge fixed in their community.
Sure.
They want to make sure their friends and neighbors are taken care of, that our taxes are low in our state. And so I understand that. I understand the culture of New Hampshire, and I'm proud to be a representative.
Excellent, and thank you for that, by the way. You've hit on it as well, but I'll just kind of reiterate in terms of what you do on a daily and a weekly basis. Perhaps you can give us some insight. I know I spoke to you before, and you had a stack of papers about that high on your desk that you were going through, and it seemed like that was a weekly requirement. Is that fundamentally true? I mean, is this the type of workload that you end up having to deal with if you're going to do a good job on it?
That's right. You have to be able to digest a lot of paperwork and a large volume of information in a very short period of time on the Executive Council. We meet once every other week formally, when we'll take up an agenda that can be 100 to several hundred items. Often it's 5,000 to 10,000 pages worth of documents that are dropped off or emailed to you, however you receive it, for us to review and approve or reject at the next meeting. So you feel like you're a college student sometimes when you're pouring through these documents, but it's very important stuff. Sometimes it seems pretty mundane, but you've got to think of the people and the issues that are on the other side,
Sure.
of these contracts, of these items. So it's important work to do. We also, do a lot of work in terms of interviewing and vetting people for important positions. So if the governor nominates someone to be a judge or a commissioner, I like to invite them to my restaurant, frankly, for a cup of coffee. I feel like that's the best way to get to know them and their experience and their qualifications. I think what I always look for is someone who is going to be a team player, has the right background, the right temperament for the position. I don't think you want someone who is necessarily in the know or knows the right people. It's about what they know and the job they can do for the state of New Hampshire. So I think we're blessed with a great contingent of public servants, both state employees and also appointed folks. That's a system I want to continue to support, where we get the best qualified people that are going to be independent voices for our state.
Certainly wonderful, and thank you for that. Now, over the past 4 years that you've served on the council, there have been quite a number of accomplishments. Perhaps you might take the next few minutes and give us a list of those that you're most proud of.
Sure. The council has been involved in a number of ways with healthcare in the state of New Hampshire. 2 years ago, we took a key vote that was a 3-2 vote. I was on the prevailing side at the time to make sure we implemented the legislature's bipartisan plan for the New Hampshire Health Protection Program, otherwise known as Medicaid expansion in the state of New Hampshire. That program has seen more than 50,000 Granite Staters sign up for it. It's given them insurance coverage, but also the economic security that comes with it. And it's also important in terms of health outcomes, but also the opioid crisis that we face, because within that program, you have substance use disorder covered. And so that means that we're going to be attracting more providers, be able to be taking care of people who are experiencing that particular critical need, which is all too common in communities across the state. We've done a lot of work on transportation issues. As I mentioned, the council writes the state's 10-year transportation plan. And, there are limited resources. While it does sound like a big amount of money, about $3 billion that are spent over 10 years on transportation projects in New Hampshire, when you start to go around to cities and towns, you find there's a lot of need out there. And so it's up to us to prioritize the money that's available and program in projects for particular years as to how that's going to roll out over the next decade. The top priority of this council and of my service on the council has been to see that I-93 is completed within a timely fashion. We now have the guarantee or the indication that by 2020, the I-93 project, the expansion project, will be completed. We had to push quite a great deal, and I helped lead the effort to make sure that the Exit 4A project was part of that plan. Initially, the documents that were given to us by the Department of Transportation sort of left it to the side in an unfunded capacity, but we made sure that the funding was there for it and that project's going to go forward. That's obviously very key to this community because of the economic development opportunities that will come with Exit 4A being completed. And so I believe by 2021, that project will be completed, which is sort of the last leg of the 93 expansion project. I think when you look at a town like Londonderry, I mean, it's very well positioned in terms of its future, in terms of the potential of its tax base to continue to grow. You see in the Pettingill Road area by the airport how investment by the state in terms of transportation can really unleash quite a bit of development, which has a positive impact in terms of job creation, economy, not just for the town, but for the region and the state. So you've seen hundreds of jobs go into that area because the state constructed finally the airport access road, and the town stepped up to the table, to build Pettingill and put in the utilities that would be needed to see that growth happen. So I hope that we see the same sort of thing around 4A, and I hope that when we look at transportation projects in the future, that we also take into consideration the economic development aspect that can come with them. I think that's a vital thing in evaluating these projects and how we program them into the 10-year plan. In terms of accomplishments, we've also done quite a bit of work on the opioid crisis. This is the number one issue that the state faces. I hear about it everywhere I go. I've been in recovery centers, I've been through treatment facilities. This is a tough one for our state to solve, and we don't yet have the capacity in terms of the treatment infrastructure to be able to take care of everyone that has a problem in our state. And so we've got to have a multi-pronged strategy on this. It should be one that isn't political, where people can come together and put the press releases and insults to the side and just do the right thing. It shouldn't be about taking credit. It should be about saving lives and making our communities safer. And so the council has done some pretty good work in terms of this crisis. We called the legislature back into a special session last year. There were a number of bipartisan initiatives that were ready to go, and so we wanted to give the legislature the opportunity to fast track those. This would be creating statewide drug courts, reclassifying fentanyl, which is the substance that's contributing to most of the overdose deaths, and toughening the penalties for trafficking that. And so, the legislature came forward and approved a number of those things, which I think are going to be important tools in this fight. The council has voted, I think, this year on about $28 million worth of grants and contracts to agencies around the state that are providing prevention, treatment, and recovery services. That certainly helps, but it's got to be a sustained effort over time. And so the next legislature, the next governor and council is going to continue to have to do a great deal of work on this. We have an individual named James Vera, who's our state's drug czar, for lack of a better term. That's how he's commonly known. And he's doing a fantastic job at coordinating the state's response, going around and making sure that different groups are talking, that there's coordination at the community, local, and state level. And it's just going to take a lot more of that. It's going to take a lot more months and years to make sure we get this right. This is a terrible scourge for New Hampshire. We lose more people to overdose deaths than we do to traffic accidents in the course of a year.
That high?
It's more than a person a day in the state of New Hampshire on average that we lose to this. This is impacting every community, large and small, and it's also becoming a workforce issue too for our state. So this is the one that we've got to solve, and we've got to check our egos and ideologies at the door in order to do it.
With regard to the opioid crisis, et cetera, now, am I correct in assuming that is effectively it's a disease? I mean, the only solution is by approaching it as if it's a disease.
You're absolutely right, and we're seeing this with our prison population, in our state, that we have the vast majority of folks in the correctional system in New Hampshire either have a mental health or substance abuse or co-occurring disorders. And if you don't provide those folks in particular, the treatment that they need to get better, they're just going to reoffend.
Sure.
And at the local level, if you don't get someone into the right place, where they get treatment, and then have the support that they need beyond that in terms of recovery services. This substance, the chemical nature of it is such that it pulls them back in pretty quickly. So it's a very, very dangerous thing, and there are a lot more dangerous things on the horizon where a grain of a substance in the state of Ohio can not just kill the person that uses it, but also a first responder that may be trying to help this individual.
Really?
So there's some pretty scary things out there, and we've got to continue to raise awareness, but also treat people with compassion. We just can't arrest our way out of this situation, though there certainly the folks that are bringing the drugs into New Hampshire,
Yes.
we need to break up those rings, and law enforcement is doing a good job at that. We've recently granted out quite a bit of money to communities around the state for Operation Granite Hammer, which is a good effort to try to take drugs off the street and disrupt the trafficking. But in terms of the folks that have substance use disorder, we need to show compassion. We need to make sure the supports are there for them. We need to also support the families that are dealing with this, and our first responders, police officers, firefighters, EMTs, nurses that are on the front lines of this. They are dealing with this day in and day out, and it's a pretty weighty thing for them.
In essence, what I'm hearing is there's absolutely no room for partisan bickering, and if rancor, anger rules, ideas and therefore comprehensive approaches are never found, they're lost.
You're
There's
right.
never an opportunity.
You're right, and I think we do have a pretty good sense of the scope of the problem, of the tools that are sort of a good response to this, and I think Republicans and Democrats are going to be able to work on this, once this election's over. I think when you get into election time, sometimes things become a little bit more dicey. But I'm hopeful that once the votes are counted on November 8th, we're going to keep going forward in a way that's going to help save lives.
I think there are a lot of people out there that are praying for November 9th right now.
Yes.
They're all tired of it.
Yes.
You mentioned drugs are, so I'm going to get back to that a little bit later on. But I was going to ask you about how this coordinates with your background. You've run a very well-established and successful restaurant. In what way does that experience help shape the way you lead on the council?
That's a great question. I think being in business, growing up in a business,
Sure.
And doing everything soup to nuts. I mean, I sweep the floors, I unlock the doors. I deal with questions of health insurance and payroll and cash flow and those types of things that a business owner would deal with, which are very valuable tools. But I think, the very hands-on nature of my business causes me to interface with the public on a regular basis. And so I think those conversations are very instructive for me to understand what is on people's minds, what are they expecting out of their government, and it really keeps me grounded in what people are experiencing. I think the experiences of my employees, and we have about 250 employees at the moment at the restaurant, are really eye-opening sometimes. There's some people out there that are struggling for a variety of reasons, that are dealing with substance abuse issues within their own families, that are dealing with catastrophic illnesses, that are struggling to put their kids through college or make sure that the next generation in their family can enjoy the same standard of living that they had or get ahead. And so this is on people's minds quite a bit. I think people look at people who are in politics, they look at the situation in Washington, and they just wonder why something can't happen in a positive, proactive way. And so I take that all to heart, and I think that is a constant reminder to me of the type of leadership that's required in Concord. And so that's what I bring to the table. It's not just business acumen, being able to read a spreadsheet or understand a balance sheet. I think it's also having that human experience that I'm exposed to on a very regular basis. Being in a business that is very central to the community in which I live gives me those stories and that information that I need to make good decisions.
Wonderful. Well, we'll go to the next step, and that is, what do you think sets you apart from other candidates and counselors, but particularly other candidates in this race?
Well, I mean, I think those experiences, of which I just spoke are very valuable, skills that I bring to the table. I mean, I think having served in this position for 2 terms gives me a level of understanding of what we're dealing with here. I think the council does well when you have folks that are level-headed, that are willing to, do the reading and do the homework, but also listen to one another,
Mm-hmm.
because I think you come out with a better informed decision in the end
Certainly.
when you keep an open mind.
Right.
And as I mentioned before, this shouldn't be about proving your political point or proving you're right. It should be about getting it right for the people that you represent. And at the end of the day, when you're dealing with large-scale contracts, you're dealing with massive programs like our state's Medicaid program, or important decisions like who to hire to be a judge. You want the best qualified candidate for the people of New Hampshire, regardless of their, partisan orientation. And so I think that's a sensibility that I bring to the job that I think is unique among the candidates, running for this particular position. I don't think that ideology has its place in the council. I think you've got to have folks that always have an outstretched hand and are always willing to work with their colleagues. It doesn't mean that I don't have, certain core values. I certainly do. But I think, the council is one place where, we've got to focus on bridging the divide as much as we can.
Well, in that concept, you've been on the council for some time now. Do you have strong bipartisan support within the district?
Yes, and I've been proud of the support we've attracted in this campaign. We have a number of folks at the grassroots level that are helping out our effort, whether it's writing a check or knocking on doors. But we've also attracted a great deal of Republican support, even though I happen to be a Democrat. There are a number of Republican elected officials or former officials that have signed up to support my candidacy, are out there talking to their friends and neighbors. And I think that's a sign of, a healthy candidacy, especially for an office like this, because, I'm not going out making a straight Democrat argument here. I'm going out making the argument that I'm the best qualified candidate. And I think when you have folks across the aisle that are supporting you, I think that's a good sign.
Thank you for that. And yes, I would totally agree with that. I think that bipartisan support is critical. Chris, looking forward into another term on the council, what are the 4 or 5 critical issues that we as a state need to address, and what do you believe can be achieved? And in that context, perhaps you can address the drugs are comment that you made earlier, or the issue with the drugs are, which you brought up earlier.
Sure. I think the opioid crisis continues to be the top issue that we face. We've made some investments the last couple years, but we have to do more, and we have to sustain it over time. We need to continue to support the New Hampshire Health Protection Program, which, as I mentioned, offers 50,000 folks in our state not just healthcare coverage, but substance use disorder coverage. And we need to make sure we empower people at the community level to attack this head on, whether it be folks in the recovery movement or whether it be our law enforcement officers who are doing just a fantastic job in dealing with so much across the state of New Hampshire. I think we need to continue to make sure that politics doesn't get in the way of decision-making around health care, whether it be the New Hampshire Health Protection Program or funding for Planned Parenthood. We saw this past year, a 3-2 majority take away funding for Planned Parenthood. This past July, we were able to restore the funds. This really shouldn't be a political football that goes back and forth. When these contracts come up, if a vendor is qualified to provide the services, which are cancer screenings, annual exams, contraception, then we should look at that organization's track record and look at the people served and vote up or down on it. And I'm going to vote for it because I think that it's very critical to the public health. It's very critical to the health and well-being of thousands of women and families in the state of New Hampshire. And so I was proud that we were able to restore that funding, and hopefully we prevent it from becoming the sort of political football it has been in the past. I think when you look at our environment, the council in a number of ways has worked on energy efficiency within state government, but also at encouraging the development of renewables around New Hampshire. We voted on a number of projects, whether it's solar, geothermal, hydro, where we've granted out money through the state's Renewable Energy Fund to communities and entities that are looking to start up a project. So, we invested in a new geothermal project in Bedford. We have a solar array, which is the largest in the state currently, in Peterborough. Another one in Lee that provides most of the power to the town of Durham, to the town government in Durham. And so I think projects like these can show a way forward for other communities and other businesses, to go green and to go toward renewables. And I think, the more this proliferates, the cheaper the technology becomes,
Sure.
and the better off we become. One of the challenges we have in our state is that we aren't diversified in terms of our energy portfolio. We're overly reliant on natural gas. We don't have the capacity in the state, and so you see huge spikes when that fluctuates. And so we've got to go to more renewables and add those to our portfolio, and that's why that fund is so important at getting projects out there. And I think people are leading with their feet on this. You see a number of companies coming in and doing this on the residential level, and I think you would want to support those kinds of initiatives. I think when you look beyond that too, something else I want to really dig into is continuing to put forward a transportation plan that makes sense for communities around the state. I mentioned the projects in Londonderry, and so when we rewrite the 10-year plan next year, I'm hopeful we continue to see those projects on track. I'm also a proponent of developing passenger rail between Manchester and the airport and Boston. I think that could be an economic game changer for this region. It could diversify the options that people have. It could be an attractive amenity for young people that want to stay here in New Hampshire, and also businesses that want to locate here. It's an issue that a lot of people talk to me about. It has overwhelming support, and I think if we do it in a way with a New Hampshire solution that captures some federal dollars that would be available for this, I think we can do it in a way that makes sense for our state financially. We can see some continued economic growth in this area because of that. And I also think we've got to make sure we have a state government that's responsive, both in terms of what we do for constituents, but also how user-friendly we are for businesses. I own a small business, and so I'll have to file things with the state, and often that's a pretty arcane process. I think the state has been behind in terms of its technology, its platforms, and that makes it harder to do business in the state of New Hampshire. We're a business-friendly state generally, both in terms of our tax structure and the accessibility to our elected officials. But I think if the state took another step forward in terms of streamlining things and making it easier to do business here, at least in terms of the technology that we offer, that could be a huge leap forward for us. So that gives you a sense of some of the things that I hope to work on. But beyond that, I don't have a set agenda. I don't come to this in a rigid, partisan straitjacket. I'm here to listen to people, to always be available to the communities that I represent, and make sure that I'm doing the best job I possibly can. Things will come up that you're not really sure we're on the horizon. We deal with a number of issues with respect to state government that you couldn't have planned for. I'll give you an example. This year we just found out that the steam plant in Concord is shutting down, and all of a sudden we've got to convert all these state buildings, off of steam to some other, energy source to power and heat those buildings. And so there's a big project going on now to do that conversion. It's going to take some time to do it. But those are the things that, while you may think are in the future, you may not be able to predict, you're asked to deal with in pretty short order. And I think our state has performed well in that particular instance. But I think I have this sort of, mindset and ability, to handle situations that come up that make me, the right person for this position for the next 2 years.
Well, it's interesting to me. What you're describing is a pretty positive future for the state as long as we continue to focus on these issues. And for that, I thank you. I think you've done, and from my own personal experience, I think you've done an extraordinary job of bringing people together to get things done. And now what I would like to do, if you would care to just speak to the audience directly, if there's any comments that you would like to add or make over the next minute or so, please feel free.
Well, I just want to thank you for giving me the platform and inviting me here to do this. I'm really optimistic about the future of New Hampshire. It's why I came back here after college, and it's why I'm so proud to be involved in the community and in public service. There isn't anything that can stop New Hampshire. We've got a lot going for us, and we do have problems. We've got this opioid crisis we've got to continue to contend with, but we have all the tools we need to be able to solve these things. We're a state with tight-knit communities where at the local level in a town like this, you can come together to build good schools and do the right thing for your friends and neighbors. And we're still nimble enough, and I think bipartisan enough to be able to do that on the state level too if we have the right leadership in place. And so I hope to be a part of that kind of future. the type of future for our state that invests in important things like education and transportation and healthcare, and the type of state that is encouraging of business development and a brighter future for us all. So I'm excited about what we can get done the next couple years. This isn't easy work, and these aren't necessarily easy issues to contend with. But I think we can put our state on the right path to have an even brighter future, and a future that's going to be very attractive to young families, to businesses, and to all those who call New Hampshire home. So thanks very much for the opportunity. I asked for everyone's vote on November 8th. I think, as you said, we'll all be happy when this one's over. It's been a long, long election season. But I would hope that, despite all the rhetoric and the negative ads, that people don't lose faith, that they don't lose faith in the process or our ability to come together and get things done. And that's just the type of work I want to get involved in once the dust settles after this election, and be able to keep pushing politics aside to make a difference and focus on the results we can get in Concord.
Well, I think with candidates like you, we can have a lot of very positive faith that things are going to be getting better. Mr. Pappas, thank you so very much for joining us and giving the citizens of our town the opportunity to hear your insights. By the way, to the town, thanks for listening to us, and good night.